We have with us Mr. S.M. Vaidya, who was at helm of Indian Oil. Much of the oil was consumed by Indian Oil along with the private players. You were, sir, sitting on the chair. Sir, help us in understanding that how Russian oil made Indian PSU OMCs comfortable, on their balance sheet, and how effective was the Russian oil, especially from the financial part. Then we can go into the present geopolitics into the game, sir.
First and, First and foremost, I would like to thank you for getting me here and express my opinion. Before I jump to the Russian oil part directly, I just want to say that today the world is consuming all-time high of oil, coal and gas. So never before in the history so much of oil, gas and coal is being consumed. And just to give you a feel of what is the fossil fuel industry today, every day the world consumes 300 million barrels of oil equivalent every day. Oil equivalent means all the oil is oil, coal converted to oil and gas converted to oil. So 300 million barrels of oil equivalent every day. And what we are trying to do is try to dislodge this huge ecosystem, which is a very, very, I will not say difficult, but very challenging task. Now coming down to your point about what role the Russian oil played. See, till a few months back, the Russian oil molecule was not banned by US. It was only an advisory issued by the US administration to refrain from buying Russian oil. They were not sanctioned. The Russian molecule was not sanctioned till 2 months back. And this was a different case. Like earlier, India has also faced sanctions of US in the sense the Iranian oil we stopped buying. We also stopped buying the Venezuelan oil because the US sanctioned that. And just about 2 months back, US has actually sanctioned Lukoil and Rosneft. So actually the game actually has dramatically changed ever since US has officially sanctioned them. Now just after the Ukraine crisis began in 2021 February, that time the oil we were buying from Russia was just 0.2% because it didn't make commercial sense. Because whatever the oil we buy, it has to be commercially making sense to the oil industry, to the PMC, OMCs. After that, there was a huge discount given in the early days of the war. You must be realizing that just after the war started, the Russian oil didn't have any home. Otherwise, their home was basically Europe, China. So China remained, but Europe simply shut off. So they had to find a new home, and that is why a huge amount of discounts were offered in the early days of the war. And that was the time when India stepped in. So right from 0.2% of Russian crude in the overall kitty of the Indian PSUs, it suddenly went up to 24, 36, and it nearly touched 40%. But over a period of time, as the war progressed, the situation stabilized and the discounts eventually fell very much nominally. In fact, the discounts till today I was told that the oil has dropped to $39 a barrel. Today news is the Ural crude has gone to $39 a barrel because Russia and India are shying away from buying it. So this is all-time low, I think. So that's how the situation came in the early days of the war. There were a lot of discounts. The Indian OMC stepped in. And the best part was that, see, you can't ramp up from 0.2% to 24 or 39% unless the refinery configuration permits it. So without any much change of hardware, we could ramp up. This is also a very important point to understand, that we quickly went to that because we didn't have any changes in the hardware to be made in the refinery. The oil diet, as we call it, for the refinery was suitable. The Urals were suitable to us, and so we went up. And now,
ladies and gentlemen, just to clarify, Ural is basically the Russian oil is called as Ural in a jargon. So the Middle Eastern oil is referred as Brent,
No, Brent is UK.
UK scale, but largely dealt with the Middle East one.
See, okay, just to,
yeah, so
since he has gone into now
yeah.
theory, I'll give you a bit of that.
Sir, this is very, we are short in time and we have to stay.
So, okay, I'll cut the long story short. So, in the early days, we did benefit immensely from the Russian oil, and that's how the Russian oil went from 0.2% to as high as 39%.
So that has also changed the geopolitics because we have reduced, our dependency on the Middle Eastern oil. Here I bring, Mr. Dinkar Shrivastava. Sir, you have dealt with, in your career, dealt with the Middle Eastern economies. You served in Saudi Arabia and Iran. If I could recollect, you were you were at helm of affairs when Iran decided to discontinue with the Asian premium. But other Middle Eastern countries still charge the Asian premium, and we tried to dislodge this premium by moving towards Russia. Now we have to go back to many of those players. Do you think we have the leverage? Do you think we still need the American backing so that they can push the Middle Eastern players? What is your thought process?
Well, let me begin by clarifying that the American backing is not to push us towards Middle East. Americans want us to buy American oil and gas. Let me begin by pointing out a difference between the first set of American policies under Biden administration and what Trump administration is following, because this has a direct bearing on the oil prices and the availability. Janet Yellen, US Treasury Secretary, came up with the brilliant idea of putting a price cap, which would reduce the Russian oil revenue without affecting the global oil supply situation. So the underlying assumption was that you could continue to buy Russian oil. Subsequent criticism in recent months, which we heard from the US about Indian purchase, funding Ukraine war, is very unfair because continued purchase of Russian oil was part of the US policy. Now, what has changed is after the US sanctions, that is last month, the first set of the Janet Yellen policy did not reduce the volumes. Trump's policy targeting Lukoil and Rosneft has affected the volumes. And this is bound to have an effect on the price. In fact, immediately after 22nd October decision of the Trump administration, the oil prices went up by 5%. And they are still above the level before 22nd October. Now this effect of reducing supplies and consequent increase in price has been partly mitigated because there is a glut in the market as of now. How long will this glut effect remain? That remains to be seen. But what we have to look at is what are the alternate sources from which we can make up for the reduction in our purchases from Russia. One obvious area is US, and that is the focus of the American policy. But we have to bear in mind that the American oil production, which is 13.5 million barrel per day or something, highest in the world, there is actually going to be not going to be any increase to accommodate Indian purchases. In fact, there is going to be slight reduction because most of out of this 13 million barrel, 8 million barrel is shale oil. And of that, there are 3 fields. That is Permian, which is going to remain stable. The other 2, Bakken and Eagle Ford, there's actually going to be reduction. So even though US wants us to buy more, and we should buy more of US crude oil, there is a limit on how much US can provide to us. So we have to look at other options. And I would not like to increase our purchase of the Gulf oil for the simple reason, there are two reasons. The Trump administration's decision has affected the supply chain, but only partially. It's only India which has been targeted under the sanction. And as a result of the first round, the Janet Yellen policy, the Europeans had switched from Russian oil to Gulf. And they are going to remain put with that till there's no end to Ukraine war in sight. So going back to Gulf will not be easy. There will be some oil available because OPEC is unwinding the production cuts. So there will be something like 100,000 or 200,000 barrel available. The OPEC plus production cuts, I think there is still about 500,000 barrels remaining. So you can get some, but in order to escape from
if I could add a supplementary here, India is also seeking a lot of investments from Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Qatar not to that extent, but they are also looking for, Indian shores for refining and storage of many of, their surplus oil. Do you think rather than getting into a supply-like arrangements or a trading relationship or transaction relationship, now it is an opportunity to deepen the relationship and set up, large refineries where, petrochemicals and modern products can be created, rather than just looking at a short-term relationship or transactional relationship. Mr. Shrivastava, help us in understanding that what do you think is the right way?
I agree with you. If we should work on these countries to give us some investment in setting up petrochemical plants, not so much refinery. Yeah, I'll come to that later because that's again subject to increasing environmental norms, and so refining for export may not be feasible in the long term, but we should welcome their investment in petrochemical plants because we have a deficit there. We should certainly welcome their investment in setting up storage. In fact, during my term as Indian ambassador to Iran, and I was ambassador during the sanction years, and we continued to buy Iranian crude, this idea came up then. So we should certainly work on it.
So, Mr. Vaidya, what is your view, when you were at the chairman's position at Indian Oil, there was a live proposal, I think from Saudi Aramco, that they wanted to set up a refinery in Maharashtra, but somehow, because of the environmental concerns and other things, that was shelved. Do you think now it is right time that we should look at many of these prospects, especially when these sovereign funds only have exposure of roughly around 500 millions in India? So this could be a yieldco like a product that where how much is the throughput, how much is the consumption, and it's an easier project financially to handle rather than the infrastructure and other risk-oriented projects. So what is your thought process?
Actually, first and foremost, what you're referring to is the Ratnagiri Refinery and Petrochemicals project. It's not shelved. Earlier, we had thought of a mega refinery of 60 million tons, but then we thought it's better to have 20 million ton 3 refineries. And Saudi Aramco and ADNOC, they are our non-resident partners. And the 3 OMCs are the Indian partners. It's very much there, and it was not shelved due to environmental reasons. It was not shelved at all, I can say. We are only on the lookout for land, because a land parcel to the extent of 15,000 acres is a problem, and that is where it is being stuck. And I am sure even the government of Maharashtra is very keen, because it's one of the biggest investments ever that will come to that state. And so are the OMCs, because India needs a refining capacity of 310 million tons from currently 260 million tons by mid-2030s. So I think this refinery is very much on the cards, and I think it should come. Regarding your other part, that they are interested to invest, I think they are all looking to invest in India. Because first and foremost, they get this feeling of oil security, because in the days to come, the US and the European Union, the oil consumption will go down. Wherever the oil consumption will rise is in India and China. So to get the security of the crude oil supplies, they are also equally keen to put up these projects. So I think it's both the parties are willing, and once the land issue is resolved, I think it will come up.
So is there any other proposition other than Maharashtra which OMCs were keen to look at?
In fact, BPCL, HPCL, they both have different type projects other than the one in Maharashtra. So I think all the three OMCs are very actively looking for Middle East participation because one of the main reasons why Middle East will continue to be one of our main suppliers is the distance part. See, freight plays a very big role in the crude oil supply chain. And the freight from the Middle East to the Indian West Coast is the least, the distance is the least. So I don't see Middle East going anywhere. We will continue to be buying from Middle East and they will be our major supplier. This Russian for 30-40% was an aberration. This is not going to remain forever. Everybody knows it. Even if there is a peace brokered in the Russia-Ukraine war, I think this will again fizzle out. So Middle East will continue to be our major suppliers with Africa, West Africa. Russia now, since we have tasted Russian oil, will not go to zero, will have 10-20%. And of course US. But US, the main problem is the freight. North America supplying crude to India is basically the freight which comes in the way. Otherwise the crude is fine. So what I foresee is in the days to come, Middle East will be the major one. Russia will continue to be there, West Africa and US.
You touched upon, the US freight, but availability of vessel is also a problem. Even from Middle East, if you have to source additional crude oil or LPG, vessel becomes a problem. Do you think that, inward, vehicles will be available or more investments need to be done? What is your thought process on those type of things?
Okay. See, one of the main fallouts of this Russian crisis was that there was a huge increase in the dark fleet, as we call it, the shadow fleet. So the shadow fleet is basically today, as per estimates, nearly 1/5 of the world's fleet is shadow fleet. When I mean world's fleet, I mean of the oil carrying tankers. And not new investments have come in VLCCs because there was a very stupid narrative in the 20s, early 20s, that we are seeing the end of oil. So the investment in VLCCs have been very, very less. And even if I invest in VLCC today, it will take about 4 years for the thing to materialize. You won't believe, in the year 2023, only one new VLCC got added in the fleet of the world. So that was something absolutely, now people are again investing back. In fact, you must have read, now India is also trying to invest into VLCCs because everybody understands that the oil will be there and to have a control on the VLCCs is having control on the logistics. So I think there should not be any problem of these vessels. Vessels are very much there. And the dark fleet is very much there, but then the dark fleet is having vessels of more than 15 to 20 years age. So they will be eventually phased out. But they can be used as floating storages. You might have read recently that a lot of countries are going for floating storages. So they may not be viable to traverse in the world, international waters, but they can be stored as a crude oil storage on the waters. So I think there should not be an issue of VLCCs.
Mr. Shrivastava, you must have read a social media post of Mr. Hardeep Puri yesterday that India will be importing roughly around 10% of our LPG consumption from the American sources. If you can, again, draw your diplomat's hat, do you see that India's deadlock with US related to trade is heading towards resolving? Although Mr. Puri has given this clarification that this is not because of the tariff, but bilateral relationship that we are entering into this contract. But how do you read the situation? Are we heading towards resolving the deadlock, or what's your thought?
Let me clarify. I'm an outsider. I'm not part of the loop. I've retired. So I'll not make any comment on government policy, but I agree with the intent which the Honorable Minister expressed, that there should be an end to this friction, which is totally unnecessary, and purchase of LPG, it's a diversification from our traditional sources. And we can add to that, earlier Mr. Vaidya had mentioned that, Indian refineries have the capacity to process a range of crude. Now let me mention and he also mentioned the shipping costs. Let me mention that there's always a $3 to $4 differential between WTI, this is West Texas Intermediate, which is the American brand benchmark, and the Indian crude oil basket. In fact, today it is around $5. Now, this differential of $3 to $4 at least should take care of the increased cost in freight. But in any case, in order to take care of geopolitical uncertainties, we should be prepared to accept a certain price differential. The lowest cost barrel is not necessarily the lowest risk barrel. And this is the point I was making. I understand that we will continue to buy from Gulf. They will be a major supplier. But you know, there's a Hormuz choke point. You have one geopolitical crisis in Europe. There was the other geopolitical crisis in Middle East. Gaza war continued for 2 years. We were fortunate it did not affect the oil price because it was in corner of the Middle East, which was not oil producing. But towards the end of the war, there was an Iran-Israel clash. Now, I hope that does not occur again, because if that happens, then all bets are off. The Hormuz carries 20% of world oil supply, and there's no replacement for that, even in the glut situation. So we should not increase our dependence on the Gulf oil. And unless you diversify, you will have no leverage to negotiate with them to take out the Asian premium. Thank you.
Mr. Vaidya, I'm just diverting from the conversation. 10, 15 years back, there was a lot of conversation on India finding its own shale gas at Raniganj block, but nothing moved forward. America built its fortune, now it's a net exporter of oil because of the shale. How do you evaluate India's shale exploration and, that whole propositions, and suddenly, it fizzled out? Do you think we have missed the bus, and perhaps, we have to deal with all this situation because we didn't make any bounty of it?
Before I say that, I'll just clarify. The WTI is a crude. See, India is a diesel economy. The American crude is only good for more of gasoline.
Yeah.
So WTI differential is basically the differential between high sulfur and low sulfur.
Yeah.
India needs high sulfur crude from the Middle East because they give me diesel.
Yeah.
Nearly 47% of Indian consumption is diesel, which is given very much by the Middle Eastern crude. So Middle Eastern crudes are a very good diet for the Indian refiners, and of course the distance advantage. Now, coming down to your other question, I'll not go into the details because I'm not an upstream person. I'm not from the E&P sector. But I can tell you one thing, that how the other high importing countries have addressed this problem. Like Japan is importing 95% of crude. South Korea is 92%. China is 75%. And India, of course, is 88 to 89% as on date. We are importing about 240 million tons of crude per year, and about 28 million tons of crude is the domestic crude, which is not increasing over a period of time. It has remained stagnant. In fact, we have to invest more to keep the figures alive. So what these three countries have done is they have gone for equity oil. That is buying the assets abroad. You won't believe Japan today has got 40% of its total crude oil in equity oil. And South Korea is about 25%, China is 27%. And in fact, Japan, they have got a policy, they have already a roadmap to go in for 60% of equity oil by 2040. So I think that is also one way. Instead of trying to find the oil in your backyard, which you may not be having, because I'm just guessing, this is my guess, it is better to have equity oil in other places. And today the world is in an excess oil scenario. Today, whatever happens, the band of volatility is the lowest in last 65 years. Volatility means whatever a big event happens, how much the band swings. It is only 18% now. Never has the world seen such a stable oil market.
Actually, when Vajpayee government was there, India also tried the same with BPRL and OVL. They went very aggressive. But suddenly when, Prime Minister Modi's regime came, they suddenly, went slow. And suddenly we are seeing, a lot of conversation going on that India needs to have cleaner assets. Then, the focus was on clean tech, solar, wind, and other things. And suddenly, the fizzle out happened. So maybe we can bring Mr. Shrivastava here because, so you can help us in understanding what went wrong in India's, equity oil story. Suddenly, we don't see that, OVL acquiring a lot of assets, BPRL acquiring a lot of assets abroad. When Mr. Vaidya is saying that, oil is in surplus, people want to sell their equities. So what is your reading into it?
Again, I won't know exactly what went into government's decision making, but let me mention that there's always this debate between investing in equity oil, which I had personally pushed very hard. And I may mention here that you, as ambassador to Libya, this is Gaddafi's Libya, during my term, Indian oil PSUs got 10 oil blocks. 5 went to Oil India IOCL consortium and 5 to OVL. So I personally fully support this idea which Mr. Vaidya mentioned, that in case your import dependency cannot come down, and because our basin may not be as prolific as we would have wished it to be, why not increase the percentage of equity oil? Because that gives you security, it brings down the prices. Because the cost of production overseas is much lower than the cost of production here. But of course, as I mentioned, there's this there's a debate that equity oil versus, you can buy crude directly without investing. So I'd leave it at that.
So maybe that scam which hit OVL in 2008-9, that may have slowed down India's appetite to buy equities and anyhow, there's no point in, discussing all those old things.
I would like to mention one point
Yes.
on the same context. See, you can't reduce the importing percentage because India is a growing economy. Our oil consumption is going by 3.5%. Domestic find is not increasing at that level. But I can reduce the vulnerability associated with importing oil. And one of them is strategic storage. Japan has got 240 days of strategic storage. China has got 120 and Korea has 150 days. So I think this also takes away a big risk because importing means it's a big risk, because especially in the current times, we don't have price volatility risk because as I said, the prices are stable. But we have source volatility risk. This is a new thing that has come
India
up.
also has strategic storage. One in
I'm saying
Karnataka,
to the
there's
extent. I'm
Visakhapatnam.
saying number of days.
Yeah, 80 days, yeah.
To 240.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm
absolutely.
saying that also needs
Point
to be
taken.
looked into. One is equity oil, one is your own strategic storage. And of course, we can go on exploring. But what happens, one important point is, during the time of low oil times, price-wise, the deep water finds have got a figure of $65 to $70 a barrel at times, sometimes $30 to $40. So you have to also see their payback in the times of these subdued oil prices.
Oil stories are very interesting stories to divulge in. It takes you very high into the geopolitics, how Trump and Putin are fighting amongst each other, and how India is dealing with. And the end use is that we will be using those diesels and petrol to go back to our homes. But it was really wonderful to have both of you gentlemen.
Can I just, but in 1-2 sentences, equity oil route, for us it may be new, but the West, the oil majors, that is the route they followed. Shell, BP, it was basically go and grab their assets overseas. And even though the age of fossil fuel may be coming to an end, that our import dependency is not going down. So I think equity oil.
So absolutely. Sir, point
overseas.
taken. The global geopolitics was changed because of the equity oil only. So, ladies and gentlemen, I need a very warm round of applause for both of these gentlemen. Thank you.